On Sunday, May 6th of 2007, John Ralph wrote an article in the Herald Sun off the back of the Geelong Cats losing to North Melbourne the week before. In this article, Ralph put the Cats players into 5 categories: improved, stagnated, gone backwards, injured, and young ones. In the stagnated section, he had players like Cameron Ling, Corey Enright, Andrew Mackie. And in gone backwards, he had players like Steve Johnson, Tom Harley, and James Kelly. That very same Sunday afternoon, the Cats beat the Tigers by 157 points at the Telstra Dome, sending Richmond into what would be known later as the club's darkest hour. Here's John Ralph years later on the article in question.
It was a drive-by shooting, wasn't it? It didn't leave much to the imagination. Yeah, maybe my sports editor should have just said to me, Ralphie, just cool your jets a little bit. It was a drive-by shooting, and 6 years on, it's been shown to be not quite right, it's fair to say. But it was amazing that this club was able to turn around this reputation. There were a lot of guys here that were struggling, that were underperforming, that weren't giving their all.
Geelong would go on to win the next 15 straight games by an average of 50.2 points. And this is the story of how it happened. We all remember this one, the famous Nick Davis snap that lives forever. The other side of that semi-final coin was the disappointment of a Geelong side that were building. The result was heartbreaking, but considering how good Sydney were, it was viewed more as a coming-of-age moment for the Cats. And then, in 2006, to everyone's surprise, they were awful. And all the positive press about their rise was gone. At the end of the year, the Cats announced a review, and the assumption was that coach Mark Bomber Thompson was going to be sacked. Instead, they decided to stick with him going into the following season to much conjecture, a trusting of a head coach that would prove to be one of the best decisions a club had ever made. So what did Bomber Thompson promise to do that allowed him to keep his job? Well, he decided that he had nothing to lose and created a brand new, high-risk, high-reward game style that would take the league by storm.
And just go and do something else, like
come on the
sell
couch.
frozen water or something. Yeah.
At the time in the AFL, the two best sides were Sydney and West Coast. Sydney, coached by Paul Roos, were famous for defensive flooding, whilst West Coast, coached by John Worsfold, were famous for their run-and-gun, high handball attacking midfield. Bomber Thompson decided to effectively fuse the two styles with a twist. He was going to make this style even more risky than it already was. Instead of being safe and using the wings like most teams do in attack, Bomber was going to go straight up the middle. This tactic is effective but risky, because if you turn the ball over, it creates the easiest forward 50 entrance for your opposition that you could imagine. But the club subscribed to the thinking, and Bomber Thompson got to work.
So that's it. It was a good match, wasn't it? Full of interest.
It's been a victory with heart for the Hawks. Siren.
Going into round 5 against North Melbourne, however, the Cats were 2-2 and appeared to be in a similar hole to last year. The disappointment began to creep in. But no matter, they had a crack at the 1-3 Kangaroos, who everyone expected them to thrash. And this was the game that changed it all. Because they lost. They got shell-shocked by a North side with absolutely nothing to lose. With about 50 away supporters in the house, Adam Simpson and his men gunned Geelong in the most improbable victory of the early season. Simpson brought his own footy and had 41 touches, whilst the Cats were flat. But that game was to be important for what happened in the change rooms after the fact. Neil Baum had only recently joined the footy department at Geelong. He said that the players blamed each other, not pointedly, just that it was our fault, not mine. This attitude had to be altered quickly, and Bomber Thompson was the one to do so. Baum spoke to Daniel Cherney in The Age and said that there was no more important moment in the Cats' journey than the discussions that took place in those rooms that day. Bomber Thompson addressed the players and said that as much as it was a team game, the individual responsibility to the goal was more important than anything. Corey Enright would be the first to accept personal accountability, saying that he got it, and that the change had to come from them first. One can only speculate that the end result was an I am Spartacus style of each player, having that same change in attitude. Internally, the game plan was still set, and now the mental side appeared to have changed. But externally, the Cats' review was useless and their season was in jeopardy. Bomber Thompson told the media that the players had no respect for the game against North, and the media had a field day.
A lack of respect for the game, our opposition. They were tougher, harder, and they played much better footy than us. There's some boys that don't want to be part of it, and we just don't want it to happen ever again. I'm over it.
So then, on May 6th, when no one thought that this Cats revival was on track, they did something unforeseen to the Tigers that would be remembered for decades.
We realised that this attacking football that we were wanting to play was only good when we won the contest and when we really defended well and we took the ball off the opposition early, and then we could attack better rather than a complete shootout. That wasn't working. We had the ball first of all because you've won in a contest, or we got it back in a hurry and then we could attack again. And from that, we just realised, oh wow, we can play.
What was to come over the course of the rest of the season will go down as one of the greatest single-season runs in the league's history. The most common answer when posed a question about the greatest single-season run is the 2000 Bombers. But the case for the 07 Cats is so easy to make, they might just pip them. They would go on to win their next 15 straight before they came up against Port at Cardinia Park in round 21. Bomber and the coaching staff would choose to rest Cameron Ling and Jimmy Bartell, amongst others, on the eve of the finals, considering they couldn't drop out of top spot.
Myself, Joel, and I think Jimmy were rested. Yeah, on the eve of finals. I remember cracking it so badly at Bomber when he said, I just want to freshen you up. I was fuming, and he just said, just settle down. It'll be all right. You got bigger fish to fry in the next month or so.
I can't deal with.
They wouldn't win that game, despite Gary Ablett's most insane efforts. Dom Cassisi would put the power up in the dying moments to keep the Cats at bay.
Good tackle. Cassisi to win it. Cassisi does win it.
But ultimately, it wouldn't matter. They would smack Brisbane the following week to finish 18-4 on the year, firmly grasping the minor premiership. Lo and behold, the banged-up unit that was rested by Bomber against the power would have some of the biggest influence in the final series. Remember that North Melbourne team that nearly derailed the whole operation in round 5? Well, the exact same teams would play out in a qualifying final. And you want the most clear indication of how far Geelong had come? They beat the Roos in a final by 106 points.
Johnson turns his man. Here's the 100 points. Over the top. Jeffrey's got 5.
That same team that had jumped them 17 weeks earlier didn't stand a chance and had 156 points dumped on them on the MCG on the biggest stage. But it would be an injustice to suggest that the Cats weren't challenged. In the top league, even the best teams are tested. And admittedly, the 2007 preliminary final against an up-and-coming Collingwood team was a dogfight. The unexpected Pies matched them for most of the way, with battles around the ground that would leave you salivating. And of course, this game is most famous for the rise of Gary Ablett as the best player in the league, who led the day, and the class of the Cats just marginally edged that of the Pies.
Can't do much now. Ablett gets through. He can do plenty. Books it back. How about that? Come at the man. Come at the man. The son of the man.
To concede for a moment, it's fair to say that the Cats were caught off guard. But in the same breath, they rose to the occasion, because that's what great teams do. Brad Ottens, Stevie J, and the Son of God, among others, stood tall to quell the Nathan Buckley farewell fairy tale. They claimed a 5-point win, which will be remembered for a long time. Despite that scare, they launched into a grand final, and that day became one of the most famous in league history. Because if you weren't convinced that the 07 Cats were the greatest single season team in history up to now, then you absolutely have to watch the grand final.
We're ready to go, the 2007 AFL Grand Final. Scott McLaren with the first bounce.
In similar fashion to what they did to the Roos in the qualifier, the Cats matched up against the second on the ladder Port Power, who had beaten them just 5 weeks earlier. And in a testament to what the Cats were and how destructively ruthless they had become, they created history that is hard to see ever being beaten. They won the grand final by 119 points, the most in history. Because that's what the Cats did. When they were tested or beaten, they made sure that if you came up against them again, they would make you pay.
And there it is! It's the Cats! They've come so close so many times in the last 44 years, but the torture is finally over. Geelong are the premiers for 2007. It's fair dinkum unbelievable, Bobby.
Port Adelaide, similar to Richmond, were condemned to football hell for the next 7 years at the hands of Geelong. The game was over by quarter time.
I think I got the ball and kicked it to my great man, my great friend Cameron Mooney, and he slotted one from the boundary, and that was the moment where it was like, yeah, we've got this. Time to party. Steve Johnson, we had Chappie, we had Gaz, we had Jimmy. So these guys were all, it was showtime for those boys, and it was an amazing experience to be able to play a quarter and a half of football knowing that we already won and we're about to become Premiership brothers.
The headline after the game read, "A massacre so complete, it was barely comprehensible." Bombers' game plan could not have gone any sweeter. The attack up the middle of the ground was so fast and destructive that Port didn't know where to look. The game plan that was fortified, ironically, by the strategies of one Ken Hinkley. The fullbacks were like iron, and the halfbacks were like Usain Bolt. Watching back the 2007 Grand Final isn't really that exciting, but if you want the most clear-cut example of how to play AFL, it's the one. They were so devastating it's not funny. They set Grand Final records for disposals, pressure, scores, and more. Steve Johnson won the norm, but the votes were scattered. It was the ultimate team performance. And the historical significance was not lost upon anyone. The Geelong faithful went crazy in the streets after breaking the 44-year premiership drought. After the Cats got so close an agonising amount of times in the 80s and 90s, after the prelim, the media were quick to assume the Cats had stumbled once more. But Geelong internally were as locked in as you could get. And that grand final paved the way for 17 years and counting of league dominance. It's hard to point to a single season where the team on top was so far ahead of the rest of the pack. And reflecting on this team, you've got so many players that could be considered the best at their position of all time. Gary Ablett Jr. has a GOAT case. Matthew Scarlett's probably the best fullback of all time. Cameron Ling is maybe the best tagger of all time. But the real testament to the season that Bomber Thompson put together is the players you might have forgotten about. A record 9 of the 22 All-Australian players that year were Cats. And the amount of random All-Australian names is a trophy for how good they were. Matthew Egan and Darren Milburn made their first AA teams. Cam Mooney kicked 60 goals for the only time in his career with a season resembling Charlie Curnow. You may have forgotten that Nathan Ablett kicked 34 goals, which is as many as Jamara and Tom Papley last year. The performances in this team, in this season, were so incredible by all on board that it's hard to fathom. And whilst they might not have the record of the 2000 Bombers, the qualitative dominance and pure team skill was arguably better. No team has come close to achieving the extent of pain Geelong inflicted on others in their heyday. And maybe the key to their dominance for the next decade and beyond was right in front of us all along. Because in that North Melbourne game, in round 5 that started it all, Geelong's best player was an 18-year-old kid with 25 touches. The only player all day that took the personal responsibility that they spoke about post-game. And his name was Joel Selwood.